April 1945, a column of German soldiers marched toward American lines near the Rhine, hands raised, weapons abandoned, but they are not surrendering because of tanks. Not because of artillery, not because of airstrikes. Each man clutches a single piece of paper, a leaflet, bright red, roughly the size of a postcard. It bears the signature of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the official seals of Britain and America. The German soldiers called these documents their golden tickets to survival, their passport to life itself. As the war drew to its final breath, an astonishing revelation emerged that would shake military strategists to their core. 3/4 of all German prisoners captured carried one of these red passes in their pockets, tucked inside uniforms, gripped between trembling fingers. What you're about to discover is the untold chronicle of the Passierschein, a British-crafted marvel of psychological engineering that rewrote the rules of warfare. This wasn't just another leaflet drifting through smoke-filled skies. This was a precision tool that accomplished the impossible, triggering mass capitulation without a single bullet leaving its chamber. By 1944, Allied commanders faced a grim mathematical certainty. German military defeat was inevitable, written in the numbers, guaranteed by industrial might and overwhelming force. But the true nightmare that kept generals awake wasn't whether they would win. It was calculating the butcher's bill for that victory. Each fortified village represented another blood-soaked ledger entry. Every bridge crossing meant writing more letters to grieving mothers. Each German soldier choosing death over surrender meant another Allied family shattered forever. The Wehrmacht continued fighting with terrifying determination even as their nation crumbled beneath their boots. Cities transformed into infernos, supply chains evaporated into chaos, command structures disintegrated, yet still they held their positions, still they fired, still they died. The question burning through Allied headquarters was brutally simple, yet maddeningly complex. How do you make an enemy lay down their weapons when they seem willing to fight until the last man falls? Traditional military doctrine offered only the bluntest of answers. Apply overwhelming violence until the survivors raise white flags. Kill and kill and kill until those remaining finally break. But British intelligence operatives had uncovered something extraordinary, something no amount of high explosive could ever touch. They'd identified a vulnerability in the German psyche itself, a peculiar cultural trait that might prove more valuable than 1,000 bombing runs. Germans possessed an almost religious reverence for official documentation, for formal authority, for proper bureaucratic procedure. Even when their world dissolved into madness, even when defeat stared them dead in the eyes, even when chaos reigned supreme, they trusted paperwork that looked legitimate. Germans preferred their affairs conducted through official channels, stamped and signed and proper. This single observation, distilled from years of enemy analysis, would become the cornerstone of Britain's most invisible and devastating weapon system. The political warfare executive emerged in September 1941 after more than a year of vicious bureaucratic warfare within British military circles. Operating from Woburn Abbey, a sprawling country estate hidden in Bedfordshire's rolling countryside, the organization chose this remote location for two critical reasons. First, secrecy demanded isolation from prying eyes and loose lips. Second, German bombers were turning London into rubble, and the PW needed to survive long enough to destroy German morale from within. Their cover designation was deliberately mundane, calling themselves the Political Intelligence Department to bore anyone who might ask questions. Their actual mission was revolutionary in its ambition. Break the enemy's will to fight without firing weapons, without dropping bombs, without spilling a single drop of blood. The architect of this psychological warfare revolution was a man named Sefton Delmer, and understanding him is essential to understanding how Britain weaponized paper. Born in Berlin during 1904 to Australian parents, Delmer spent his earliest years speaking only German, absorbing the language and culture like native soil. He became the first British journalist to sit across from Adolf Hitler for an interview. In 1931, staring into the eyes of the man who would soon plunge the world into darkness. By 1940, Delmer was orchestrating PW's black propaganda operations from Milton Bryan, creating counterfeit German radio stations so authentic, so perfectly mimicked, that approximately 40% of German soldiers believed they were listening. To their own broadcasts, Delmer's operational philosophy stripped away every romantic notion about warfare and propaganda. He wasn't interested in appealing to German morality. He considered that a fool's errand. He didn't waste time trying to convert them to democracy or make them see the error of their ideology. Instead, Delmer understood something darker and more fundamental about human nature. Appeal to the Schweinhund, he insisted, the inner pig dog that lives in every man. Target their self-interest, their survival instinct, their desperate desire to see tomorrow's sunrise. Give them a selfish reason to quit, and they'll quit. The safe conduct path that emerged from Delmer's brutal pragmatism was engineered with surgical precision. Every dimension, every color choice, every design element was calculated to exploit German psychological vulnerabilities. The size measured exactly 5 by 8.5 inches, deliberately chosen because it felt substantial. Enough to convey official weight, yet small enough to hide inside a boot or fold into a breast pocket. The paper quality matched German banknotes precisely, selected because years of intelligence gathering revealed that Germans associated high quality paper stock with governmental legitimacy and official authority. The color selection alone underwent multiple iterations, revised again and again based on interrogations of captured soldiers, before finally settling on bright scarlet red for maximum battlefield visibility. Imagine a soldier in a muddy foxhole, artillery screaming overhead, his world reduced to gray smoke and brown earth. That flash of brilliant red cutting through the gloom like a beacon, like hope itself made visible. Every design element was a psychological weapon aimed at German cultural conditioning. The great seals of Britain and the United States dominated. The document's header, massive emblems lending the weight of allied governmental authority. The SHAEF insignia added military legitimacy. Proving this wasn't some crude field printing operation but an official document from Supreme Headquarters itself. The engraving style mimicked banknotes and stock certificates, tapping into German respect for financial instruments and formal bonds. At the bottom, reproduced with painstaking accuracy, sat the facsimile signature of General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. Through prisoner interrogations, PWE discovered a fascinating detail. German soldiers had no idea what Eisenhower's signature actually looked like, couldn't distinguish his handwriting from anyone else's scrawl. So rather than risk confusion, they spelled his name out in full block letters beneath the signature. Every tiny detail received this level of obsessive attention because every detail mattered. When you're trying to save lives through typography and paper stock, the text itself endured 6 documented revision cycles, each one refining the message based on feedback from captured Germans. Initially, English text appeared above German, but prisoners reported confusion about which language to trust. The solution was elegant. Place German first and add a notation clarifying that the English was merely translation for Allied personnel. Intelligence reports revealed that German soldiers were physically sharing single passes among groups, each man holding a corner, so the designers added a phrase explicitly stating the pass was valid for one or several bearers. For unit commanders contemplating mass surrender, special passes were printed at double the standard size, making them visually distinct and unmistakably official. The designers noted with dry British understatement that this represented sound psychology when dealing with Teutons. The production scale grew to consume Britain's industrial capacity. Waterloo's of London, one of the nation's most prestigious security printing firms, manufacturers of official documents and currency, handled the manufacturing operation. By May 1945, leaflet operations were devouring 80% of Britain's entire offset printing capacity. Let those numbers sink into your understanding. The weapons factories that built Spitfires and tanks couldn't match the resource allocation dedicated to printing paper. Approximately 6 billion leaflets rained down over continental Europe during the war years. 6 billion pieces of paper carrying messages, threats, promises, and those precious safe conduct passes. Northwestern Europe alone received over 3 billion leaflets. Safe conduct passes were strategically mixed at a ratio of 10 to 15% with other combat propaganda leaflets, which means that during peak operational tempo, over 10 million Passierschein dropped monthly onto German positions, into German cities across German farmland. Everywhere German eyes might see them. British leaflet warfare actually commenced on the war's very first night, September 3, 1939, 10 Armstrong. Whitworth-Whitley bombers lifted off into darkness and delivered approximately 5.4 million leaflets over Hamburg, Bremen, and the Ruhr Valley. The RAF called these missions nickel raids, a sardonic reference to their cheap cost compared to actual bombing operations. While those early efforts focused on news leaflets and propaganda messages rather than surrender passes, they established the infrastructure, the delivery methods, and the operational doctrine that would later reign the Passierschein across Europe like deadly snowfall. The balloon unit, operating from headquarters at General Meadows in Kent, developed an ingenious supplementary delivery system that sounds like something from a spy novel. They constructed hydrogen-filled paper balloons capable of remaining aloft for 3 full days, drifting silently over German territory carrying payloads of leaflets. December 1941 set the record when approximately 4.45 million leaflets were delivered by balloon operations alone. The Germans could scramble fighters to intercept aircraft. They could position anti-aircraft guns to shoot down bombers, but they possessed no defense against the wind itself carrying British propaganda deep into their homeland. Distribution methods evolved to match tactical requirements and operational conditions. The American 8th Air Force handled 80% of leaflet delivery, specifically the 406th Night Leaflet Squadron operating from their base at Cheddington. Royal Air Force bombers delivered another 10% during their missions. Fighter bombers contributed 5%, dropping leaflets during tactical operations and ground attack runs. For frontline distribution requiring pinpoint accuracy, Allied artillery crews modified their shells in a stroke of devastating creativity. Standard 105 mm and 155 mm artillery shells were loaded with leaflets instead of explosives. These shells burst over German positions exactly like high-explosive rounds, but instead of showering troops with white-hot shrapnel, they rained paper promises of survival. The effectiveness data compiled by SHAF headquarters and published in Army Talks magazine during September 1945 tells a story that military historians still study with fascination. By October 1944, 77% of German prisoners captured by Allied forces had read at least one leaflet, often more. On the Brest Peninsula, approximately 80% of captured Germans possessed leaflets when searched. At Le Havre, 75% of the 11,300 prisoners taken were found carrying propaganda materials. One SAAF intelligence report documented 3 German soldiers surrendering together with only a single leaflet shared between them. Each man gripped one corner of that precious document with one hand while raising the other in surrender, afraid that releasing their paper passport might somehow invalidate their claim to safety. Individual incidents reveal how deeply these passes penetrated German defensive lines and German consciousness. 44 men from the 256th Volksgrenadier Division deserted their unit in a single day, crossing to a Third Army position. Nearly every one of them carried a safe conduct pass clutched in their fists. Another German soldier surrendered while loudly proclaiming that he possessed a document bearing General Eisenhower's personal signature, genuinely believing that the Supreme Allied Commander had personally authorized his individual surrender, had singled him out for mercy. The ultimate validation of the campaign's success came from the most unlikely source imaginable, the enemy himself. Joseph Goebbels, Nazi minister of propaganda and master of mass manipulation, wrote in his personal diary during April 1945 that enemy propaganda was beginning to have an uncomfortably noticeable effect on the German people. Anglo-American leaflets were no longer carelessly discarded or used as toilet paper, but were being read attentively, studied carefully, discussed in whispers. British broadcasts had found a grateful audience hungry for truth after years of lies. When the master propagandist of the Third Reich admits in his private writings that your propaganda is working, that his own people trust your words over his, you have achieved something extraordinary. German countermeasures revealed the depths of their panic and concern. Military commanders imposed severe penalties on soldiers who failed to immediately surrender enemy propaganda materials to their superiors. Civilians faced mandatory reporting requirements, forced to turn over any leaflets they found to police authorities. Concentration camp prisoners caught possessing Allied leaflets faced immediate execution without trial or appeal. Despite these draconian measures, despite the threat of death for simply reading a piece of paper, intelligence estimates concluded that at least 1 in 7 leaflets were never turned in, were instead hidden, read, discussed, and kept as insurance. Policies against the future, children proved especially valuable targets for leaflet distribution because they didn't yet understand that reading enemy propaganda was forbidden. They picked up the bright red papers with innocent curiosity, showed them to parents, asked questions that adults were afraid to voice. The Germans even produced parody safe conduct passes with altered texts mocking the originals, stating that the bearer wished to enter captivity for the next 10 years and betray his fatherland. The very existence of these crude parodies confirms how seriously German high command took the threat. You don't waste resources mocking something unless it's hurting you badly, a captured German major interrogated in February 1945 declared the Passierschein the most effective Allied leaflet he had encountered during the entire war, noting with bitter resignation that if captivity was genuinely as comfortable as the passes promised, then surrendering was objectively superior to fighting on. This wasn't enemy propaganda, this was simple mathematics of survival. The strategic impact extended far beyond counting individual surrenders. Every German soldier who chose captivity over continued resistance represented 1 fewer defender at the next river crossing, 1 fewer machine gun position that needed to be destroyed, 1 fewer casualty for already overwhelmed Allied medical units to treat, 1 fewer bullet that might find its way into a British or American soldier's chest. The leaflet accomplished something that artillery preparation and aerial bombardment could never achieve. It convinced men to stop fighting before the battle even began, removed them from the equation before contact was made. Post-war analysis by military historians has sparked endless debate about exactly how many surrenders can be attributed directly to leaflet operations versus other contributing factors, like collapsing supply lines, inevitable military defeat, and the general disintegration of German command structure. The honest assessment is that psychological warfare rarely operates in isolation, rarely claims sole credit for victory. What the evidence demonstrates beyond dispute is that leaflets accelerated a process that would have otherwise extracted a far higher butcher's bill in Allied casualties. A German soldier already questioning whether continued resistance made any sense, already wondering if dying for a lost cause was truly noble, needed only a plausible excuse to surrender without shame. The Passierschein provided exactly that. Excuse, an official document with proper seals and signatures, a guarantee of humane treatment according to international law, permission in effect to stop fighting without dishonor, to choose survival without being labeled a coward. Comparative analysis reveals precisely what made the British approach devastatingly superior to German efforts. Nazi propaganda leaflets targeting Allied troops employed crude, ham-fisted tactics that revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of their audience. They used sexual themes about unfaithful wives waiting at home, attempted racial division by targeting African American soldiers with racist messaging, deployed anti-Semitic content that revealed more about German obsessions than Allied vulnerabilities. American military analysis found German propaganda efforts ranged from occasionally clever and professionally executed to crude, makeshift, and frequently in appallingly poor taste. More fundamentally, German propaganda faced an insurmountable strategic problem. They were targeting an advancing force with high morale, soldiers winning battles, liberating nations, marching toward inevitable victory. The British understood a crucial truth about psychological warfare. It works best against an enemy already questioning whether continued resistance serves any purpose. Soldiers who can see defeat approaching and are desperately searching for a way out that doesn't brand them as traitors. The PW's legacy extends far beyond the Second World War's conclusion, reaching into modern psychological operations doctrine. The principles developed at Woburn Abbey, the understanding that paper can prove mightier than bombs when deployed with precision and psychological insight, shaped military thinking for decades afterward. The simple insight that a German soldier would trust an official-looking document even when that document came from his mortal enemy proved devastatingly. Tragically, beautifully accurate, consider once more those German soldiers marching toward American lines during April 1945, hands raised in surrender, clutching their bright red passes like holy relics. They had been told by their own commanders, by their own propaganda machine, that surrender meant death or slavery, that Allied captivity represented a fate worse than dying with a rifle in their hands. The Passierschein told them something radically different. It communicated in official language, printed on official paper, adorned with official signatures, that they would receive treatment according to the Geneva Convention, that they would be given food and medical care in humane conditions. For soldiers who had been systematically lied to by their own government for years, who had watched promises turn to ash and guarantees become cruelty, that simple promise of truth delivered on paper that resembled a bank certificate rather than battlefield propaganda was enough to tip the scales. The bombs destroyed German cities, reduced them to smoking rubble and shattered stone. The tanks crossed German rivers, crushed defensive positions, rolled over desperate resistance. The infantry cleared German towns house by house, room by room, paying in blood for every meter. But the leaflet, that stroke of British genius, that marvel of psychological engineering, convinced German soldiers that living as prisoners offered more future than dying as defenders. No weapon in the entire Allied arsenal achieved a superior ratio of enemy forces neutralized to resources expended. 6 billion pieces of paper, 80% of British printing capacity, and a psychological understanding of the enemy that no bomb could ever replicate. British engineering excellence typically gets measured in muzzle velocities and armor penetration, in horsepower and explosive yields. But at Woburn Abbey, British engineers of an entirely different kind accomplished something equally remarkable, perhaps more so. They constructed a weapon from psychology and paper, from understanding and typography, from truth and official seals, and against every expectation, against all conventional military wisdom, it worked spectacularly.